The Gambler. A Novel. From the Diary of a Young Man. Chapter 1. At last I have come back from my fortnight's absence. Our friends have already been 2 days in Rouletteenberg. I imagined that they were expecting me with the greatest eagerness. I was mistaken, however. The general had an extremely independent air. He talked to me condescendingly and sent me away to his sister. I even fancied that the general was a little ashamed to look at me. Marya Philippovna was tremendously busy and scarcely spoke to me. She took the money, however, counted it, and listened to my whole report. They were expecting Mtsentsov, the little Frenchman, and some Englishmen. As usual, as soon as there was money, there was a dinner party, in the Moscow style. Polina Alexandrovna, seeing me, asked why I had been away so long, and without waiting for an answer went off somewhere. Of course she did that on purpose. We must have an explanation, though. Things have accumulated. They had assigned me a little room on the 4th story of the hotel. They know here that I belong to the general's suite. It all looks as though they had managed to impress the people. The general is looked upon by everyone here as a very rich Russian grandee. Even before dinner he commissioned me, among other things, to change 2 notes for 1,000 francs each. I changed them at the office of the hotel. Now we shall be looked upon as millionaires for a whole week at least. I wanted to take Misha and Nadia out for a walk, but on the stairs I was summoned back to the general. He had graciously bethought him to inquire where I was taking them. The man is absolutely unable to look me straight in the face. He would like to very much, but every time I meet his eyes with an intent, that is, disrespectful air, he seems overcome with embarrassment. In very bombastic language, piling one sentence on another, and at last losing his thread altogether, he gave me to understand that I was to take the children for a walk in the park, as far as possible from the casino. At last he lost his temper completely, and added sharply, "Or else maybe you'll be taking them into the gambling saloon. You must excuse me," he added, "but I know you are still rather thoughtless and capable perhaps of gambling. In any case, though I am not your mentor and have no desire to be, yet I have the right at any rate to desire that you will not compromise me, so to speak." "But I have no money," I said calmly. "One must have it before one can lose it." "You shall have it at once," answered the general, flushing a little. He rummaged in his bureau, looked up in an account book, and it turned out that he had 120 roubles owing me. "How are we to settle up?" he said. "We must change it into thalers. Come, take 100 thalers. The rest, of course, won't be lost." I took the money without a word. "Please don't be offended by my words. You are so ready to take offense. If I did make an observation, it was only, so to speak, by way of warning, and of course I have some right to do so." On my way home before dinner, with the children, I met a perfect cavalcade. Our party had driven out to look at some ruin. 2 magnificent carriages, superb horses. In one carriage was Mademoiselle Blanche with Marya Philippovna and Polina. The Frenchman, the Englishman, and our general were on horseback. The passers-by stopped and stared. A sensation was created. But the general will have a bad time all the same. I calculated that with the 4,000 francs I had brought, added to what they had evidently managed to get hold of, they had now 7,000 or 8,000 francs. But that is not enough for Mademoiselle Blanche. Mademoiselle Blanche, too, is staying at the hotel with her mother. Our Frenchman is somewhere in the house, too. The footman calls him Monsieur le Comte. Mademoiselle Blanche's mother is called Madame la Comtesse. Well, who knows? They may be Comte and Comtesse. I felt sure that Monsieur le Comte would not recognize me when we assembled at dinner. The General, of course, would not have thought of introducing us or even saying a word to him on my behalf, and Monsieur le Comte has been in Russia himself, and knows what is called an ushitel is very small fry. He knows me very well, however. But I must confess I made my appearance at dinner unbidden. I fancy the General forgot to give orders, or else he would certainly have sent me to dine at the table d'hôte. I came of my own accord, so that the General looked at me with astonishment. Kind-hearted Marya Philippovna immediately made a place for me, but my meeting with Mr. Astley saved the situation, and I could not help seeming to belong to the party. I met this strange Englishman for the first time in the train in Prussia, where we sat opposite to one another when I was travelling to join the family. Then I came across him as I was going into France, and then again in Switzerland, in the course of that fortnight twice, and now I suddenly met him in Rouletteenberg. I never met a man so shy in my life. He is stupidly shy, and, of course, is aware of it himself, for he is by no means stupid. He is very sweet and gentle, however. I drew him into talk at our first meeting in Prussia. He told me that he had been that summer at North Cape, and that he was very anxious to visit the fair at Nizhny Novgorod. I don't know how he made acquaintance with the General. I believe that he is hopelessly in love with Polina. When she came in, he glowed like a sunset. He was very glad that I was sitting beside him at the table, and seemed all ready to look upon me as his bosom friend. At dinner, the Frenchman gave himself airs in an extraordinary way. He was nonchalant and majestic with everyone. In Moscow, I remember, he used to blow soap bubbles. He talked a great deal about finance and Russian politics. The General sometimes ventured to contradict, but discreetly, and only so far as he could without too great loss of dignity. I was in a strange mood. Of course, before we were half through dinner, I had asked myself my usual invariable question, why I went on dancing attendance on this General and had not left them long ago. From time to time I glanced at Polina Alexandrovna. She took no notice of me whatever. It ended by my flying into a rage and making up my mind to be rude. I began by suddenly, apropos of nothing, breaking in on the conversation in a loud voice. What I longed to do above all things was to be abusive to the Frenchman. I turned round to the General, and very loudly and distinctly, I believe, interrupted him. I observed that this summer it was utterly impossible for a Russian to dine at table d'hôte. The General turned upon me an astonished stare. "If you are a self-respecting man," I went on, "you will certainly be inviting abuse and must put up with affronts to your dignity. In Paris, on the Rhine, even in Switzerland, there are so many little Poles and French people who sympathize with them that there's no chance for a Russian to utter a word." I spoke in French. The General looked at me in amazement. I don't know whether he was angry or simply astonished at my so forgetting myself. "It seems someone gave you a leçon," said the Frenchman carelessly and contemptuously. "I had a row for the first time with a Pole in Paris," I answered. then with a French officer who took the Pole's part. And then some of the French came over to my side when I told them how I tried to spit in Monseigneur's coffee." "Spit?" asked the general with dignified perplexity, and he even looked about him aghast. The Frenchman scanned me mistrustfully. "Just so," I answered. After feeling convinced for 2 whole days that I might have to pay a brief visit to Rome about our business, I went to the office of the papal embassy to get my passport visséd. There I was met by a little abbé, a dried-up little man of about 50 with a frost-bitten expression. After listening to me politely but extremely dryly, he asked me to wait a little. Though I was in a hurry, of course I sat down to wait, and took up L'Opinion Nationale, and began reading a horribly abusive attack on Russia. Meanwhile I heard someone in the next room ask to see Monseigneur. I saw my abbé bow to him. I addressed the same request to him again. He asked me to wait, more dryly than ever. A little later someone else entered, a stranger, but on business, some Austrian. He was listened to and at once conducted upstairs. Then I felt very much vexed. I got up, went to the abbé and said resolutely that as Monseigneur was receiving, he might settle my business too. At once the abbé drew back in great surprise. It was beyond his comprehension that an insignificant Russian should dare to put himself on a level with Monseigneur's guests. As though delighted to have an opportunity of insulting me, he looked me up and down and shouted in the most insolent tone, "Can you really suppose that Monseigneur is going to leave his coffee on your account?" Then I shouted too, but more loudly than he. "Let me tell you, I'm ready to spit in your Monseigneur's coffee. If you don't finish with my passport this minute, I'll go to him in person." "What, when the Cardinal is sitting with him?" cried the abbé, recoiling from me with horror, and flinging wide his arms, he stood like a cross, with an air of being ready to die rather than let me pass. Then I answered him that I was a heretic and a barbarian, que je suis hérétique et barbare, and that I cared nothing for all these archbishops, cardinals, monseigneurs, and all of them. In short, I showed I was not going to give way. The abbé looked at me with uneasy ill humour, then snatched my passport and carried it upstairs. A minute later it had been visséd. "Here, wouldn't you like to see it?" I took out the passport and showed the Roman visé. "Well, I must say," the general began. "What saved you was saying that you were an hérétique and barbarian," the Frenchman observed with a smile. "Cela n'était pas si bête." "Why, am I to model myself upon our Russians here? They sit, not daring to open their lips, and almost ready to deny they are Russians. In Paris, anyway in my hotel, they began to treat me much more attentively when I told everyone about my passage-at-arms with the abbé. The fat Polish pan, the person most antagonistic to me at table d'hôte, sank into the background. The Frenchmen did not even resent it when I told them that I had, 2 years previously, seen a man at whom, in 1812, a French chasseur had shot, simply in order to discharge his gun. The man was at that time a child of 10, and his family had not succeeded in leaving Moscow. "That's impossible," the Frenchman boiled up. "A French soldier would not fire at a child." "Yet it happened," I answered. "I was told it by a most respectable captain on the retired list, and I saw the scar on his cheek from the bullet myself." The Frenchman began talking rapidly and at great length. The general began to support him, but I recommended him to read, for instance, passages in the Notes of General Perovsky, who was a prisoner in the hands of the French in 1812. At last Marya Philippovna began talking of something else to change the conversation. The general was very much displeased with me, for the Frenchman and I had almost begun shouting at one another. But I fancy my dispute with the Frenchman pleased Mr. Astley very much. Getting up from the table, he asked me to have a glass of wine with him. In the evening I duly succeeded in getting a quarter of an hour's talk with Polina Alexandrovna. Our conversation took place when we were all out for a walk. We all went into the park by the casino. Polina sat down on a seat facing the fountain and let Nadenka play with some children not far from her. I, too, let Misha run off to the fountain, and we were at last left alone. We began, of course, at first with business. Polina simply flew into a rage when I gave her only 700 guldens. She had reckoned positively on my pawning her diamonds in Paris for 2,000 guldens, if not more. "I must have money, come what may," she said. "I must get it or I am lost." I began asking her what had happened during my absence. "Nothing but the arrival of 2 pieces of news from Petersburg. First, that Granny was very ill, and then 2 days later that she seemed to be dying. The news came from Timofey Petrovitch," added Polina, "and he's a trustworthy man. We are expecting every day to hear news of the end." "So you are all in suspense here?" I asked. "Of course, all of us, and all the time. We've been hoping for nothing else for the last 6 months. "And are you hoping for it?" I asked. "Why, I'm no relation. I am only the general's stepdaughter. But I am sure she will remember me in her will." "I fancy you'll get a great deal," I said emphatically. "Yes, she was fond of me. But what makes you think so?" "Tell me," I answered with a question. "Our Marquis is initiated into all our secrets, it seems." "But why are you interested in that?" asked Polina, looking at me dryly and austerely. "I should think so. If I'm not mistaken, the general has already succeeded in borrowing from him." "You guess very correctly." "Well, would he have lent the money if he had not known about your Granny? Did you notice at dinner, 3 times speaking of her, he called her Granny? What intimate and friendly relations!" "Yes, you are right. As soon as he knows that I have come into something by the will, he will pay his addresses to me at once. That is what you wanted to know, was it?" "He will only begin to pay you his addresses? I thought he had been doing that for a long time." "You know perfectly well that he hasn't," Polina said with anger. "Where did you meet the Englishman?" she added after a minute's silence. "I knew you would ask about him directly." I told her of my previous meetings with Mr. Astley on my journey. "He is shy and given to falling in love, and of course he's fallen in love with you already." "Yes, he's in love with me," answered Polina. "And of course he's 10 times as rich as the Frenchman. Why, is it certain that the Frenchman has anything? Isn't that open to doubt?" "No, it is not. He has a chateau of some sort. The general has spoken of that positively. Well, are you satisfied?" "If I were in your place, I should certainly marry the Englishman." "Why?" asked Polina. "The Frenchman is better looking, but he is nastier, and the Englishman, besides being honest, is 10 times as rich," I snapped out. "Yes, but on the other hand, the Frenchman is a marquis and clever," she answered in the most composed manner. But is it true?" I went on in the same way. "It certainly is." Polina greatly disliked my questions, and I saw that she was trying to make me angry by her tone and the strangeness of her answers. I said as much to her at once. "Well, it really amuses me to see you in such a rage. You must pay for the very fact of my allowing you to ask such questions and make such suppositions." "I certainly consider myself entitled to ask you any sort of question," I answered calmly, "just because I am prepared to pay any price you like for it, and I set no value at all on my life now." Polina laughed. "You told me last time at the Schlagenberg that you were prepared, at a word from me, to throw yourself head foremost from the rock, and it is 1,000 feet high, I believe. Some day I shall utter that word, solely in order to see how you will pay the price, and trust me, I won't give way. You are hateful to me just because I've allowed you to take such liberties, and even more hateful because you are so necessary to me. But so long as you are necessary to me, I must take care of you." She began getting up. She spoke with irritation. Of late she had always ended every conversation with me in anger and irritation, real anger. "Allow me to ask you, what about Mademoiselle Blanche?" I asked, not liking to let her go without explanation. "You know all about Mademoiselle Blanche. Nothing more has happened since. Mademoiselle Blanche will no doubt be Madame la Générale. That is, if the rumor of Granny's death is confirmed, of course, for Mademoiselle Blanche and her mother and her cousin twice removed, the Marquis, all know very well that we are ruined." "And is the General hopelessly in love?" "That's not the point now. Listen and remember. Take these 700 florins and go and play. Win me as much as you can at roulette. I must have money now, come what may." Saying this, she called Nadenka and went into the casino, where she joined the rest of the party. I turned into the first path to the left, wondering and reflecting. I felt as though I had had a blow on the head after the command to go and play roulette. Strange to say, I had plenty to think about, but I was completely absorbed in analyzing the essential nature of my feeling towards Polina. It was true I had been more at ease during that fortnight's absence than I was now on the day of my return, though on the journey I had been as melancholy and restless as a madman, and at moments had even seen her in my dreams. Once, waking up in the train, in Switzerland, I began talking aloud, I believe, with Polina, which amused all the passengers in the carriage with me. And once more I now asked myself the question, do I love her? And again I could not answer it, or rather I answered for the 100th time that I hated her. Yes, she was hateful to me. There were moments, on every occasion at the end of our talks, when I would have given my life to strangle her. I swear, if it had been possible on the spot to plunge a sharp knife in her bosom, I believe I should have snatched it up with relish. And yet I swear by all that's sacred, that if at the Schlagenberg, at the fashionable peak, she really had said to me, "Throw yourself down," I should have thrown myself down at once, also with positive relish. I knew that. In one way or another it must be settled. All this she understood wonderfully well, and the idea that I knew, positively and distinctly, how utterly beyond my reach she was, how utterly impossible my mad dreams were of fulfillment, that thought, I am convinced, afforded her extraordinary satisfaction. If not, how could she, cautious and intelligent as she was, have been on such intimate and open terms with me? I believe she had hitherto looked on me as that empress of ancient times looked on the slave before whom she did not mind undressing because she did not regard him as a human being. Yes, often she did not regard me as a human being. I had her commission, however, to win at roulette, at all costs. I had no time to consider why must I play, and why such haste, and what new scheme was hatching in that ever-calculating brain. Moreover, it was evident that during that fortnight new facts had arisen of which I had no idea yet. I must discover all that and get to the bottom of it, and as quickly as possible. But there was no time now. I must go to roulette. Breaking in. The basic outline of our situation has now been revealed. Here is a quick recap, at least as our narrator understands things at the moment. The general is smitten with Blanche, while Blanche is hoping to become his wife, contingent, of course, on his becoming rich. But his hopes for prosperity are tied up with one Granny, a rich elderly woman whose wealth he hopes to inherit, and whose health appears to be failing. The Frenchman also appears eager to access this money, and his dealings with the general seem to be tied up with the promise of tapping into it in the future. Polina also stands to gain an inheritance, but seems eager to get money right away. Why this is so is currently a mystery. The young woman appears to have 3 separate admirers: the Frenchman, Mr. Astley, and of course our protagonist. I'll postpone comment on the curious nature of that latter attraction, but we have gained a taste of its flavor already. The narrator, as a mere tutor, has the freedom to leave the general's party, but of course has this acute personal interest in sticking around. Despite his lowly status, he is clearly a capable man, having been entrusted with important business errands abroad. The rivalry between the narrator and the Frenchman carries sharp nationalistic overtones. Part of this will have its source in history. The anecdote the narrator tells at dinner about the brutality of a French soldier is set during the Napoleonic invasion of Russia in 1812. Already we have seen references to 4 different national currencies in the text: Russian rubles, French francs, German thalers, and Dutch guldens. I'm afraid I don't have the details of 19th century rates of exchange, but we can expect that the money will flow liberally, or recklessly, in Rouletteenberg. Rouletteenberg itself is, of course, fictitious. There is a mountain in western Germany called Schlangenberg, although I'm not sure it answers to the description provided here, which is supposed to involve a 1,000-foot precipice. End of comments.